It was better to be more cautious. A bit later, there was another avalanche, but not as massive as the last one. Xiao Xuan did not intend to leave before dawn. So they waited until sunrise, for it was not convenient for them to move or identify the paths when it was still dark. They were targeted by both a ferocious beast and a severe avalanche. After running away for such a long time, all kinds of emotions began to well up once they relaxed. Hungry and tired, but they still had to stay alert because it was necessary to avoid unforeseen dangers. Because of that, Xiao Xuan had cursed the troublemaker Fei over 9,000 times in his heart. Originally, they had brought a piece of meat with them, but they lost it during their escape. Xiao Xuan searched in his animal skin bag and found a spearhead and a small gourd inside. The gourd was filled with boar blood, and there was still some boar blood left. Mai and the others had put in some kind of a grass essence, which could prevent the blood from coagulating. After drinking some boar blood, Xiao Xuan passed his gourd on to Mao. That guy was in even worse condition than him. All his stuff was lost on the way, except for some short spears and a stone sword. Although there was no meat, a swig of the four-fanged boar's blood could restore their energy to some extent. Mao looked around and asked Xiao Xuan, "Do you think Mai and the others will come to find us?" "I'm not sure. If they were in some other places, for example the basin or the valley, or the forest they marched through, Mai and the other warriors would probably come and find them based on their traces. However, in this place, since they were stepping on ice and snow, a lot of the traces they left had been erased by the snow. Besides, when they were chased after by that thorn-black wind, instead of going straight up, Xiao Xuan began to escape circularly after they got to a certain altitude. The temperature at night was far lower than during daylight. When they were climbing up the mountain, it was the middle of the day, and they already felt quite cold, let alone now when it was already midnight. Perhaps they had consumed too much energy that night. The absorption of the four-fanged boar blood was quicker than before. Mao took 3 swigs constantly. Their totemic power hadn't stopped running. It was the only option, for one would get easily frozen without the support of the totemic power, so they had to keep it running. Finally, they had some calm, but Mao did not know what to talk with Xiao Xuan. After all, he had some problems with Xiao Xuan. After drinking quite a bit of the blood of the four-fanged boar, Mao felt a little sleepy. However, the taut nerves and endless icy wind had driven away his drowsiness a lot. Glancing at the surroundings, there was nothing but the darkness. They could barely see the vicinity, but everything disappeared in the distance. After having bottled it up for a while, Mao finally decided to ask Xiao Xuan why he could see the surroundings in the dark. However, just when he turned to Xiao Xuan, he found him gulping down the boar blood again from his gourd. It was the 5th swig. Normally, Mai only allowed them to take 1 swig at a time, for they would not be able to endure the energy from that blood if they drank too much. Even when Mao himself was exhausted, he merely constantly took 3 swigs, which made him feel that it was near his limitation. When you have too much energy at one time, you may find it difficult to control, and when the energy got out of control, you may suffer from the energy rioting inside your body. However, Xiao Xuan had no intention of stopping, and judging from his actions, perhaps there would be a 6th swig shortly. "Are you okay, with so much of that?" Mao asked. "For now it's okay." Xiao Xuan felt that the energy brought in by the boar blood would quickly fade away after some time. The feeling of exhaustion hit him again and again, so he needed to take another swig. After a few rounds of that, Xiao Xuan did not find any side effect, so he followed his feeling and kept drinking the boar's blood. Mao only took 3 swigs from the half-full gourd, and Xiao Xuan drank up the rest. When there were no more boar blood in the gourd, there was a misty light on the horizon. Mao looked at Xiao Xuan as if he was staring at a monster. He could not figure out why that guy could drink so much boar blood and still act normally. Instead of suffering from issues in his body, he seemed more and more vigorous. No one would believe that if he told the people in the tribe. "Shall we leave now?" Mao asked. The snow had stopped falling for quite some time, and with the lighted-up horizon, they could obviously feel the rise of the temperature. When the sun rose, they would not have to continue circulating their totemic power. "Let's wait for a bit more," Xiao Xuan answered as he gazed at the sky. The clouds dispersed a little and Xiao Xuan could see a peak among the sea of clouds, which was the mountaintop of a mountain in the distance. It constantly revealed its existence within the surge of clouds. Farther away, there were taller mountains poking into the deep blue sky. When the sun finally came out and shed its lights on the snowy region, the icy tone finally lessened. Endless snow filled one's horizon, and when you looked up, you could see the peak of the mountain. Snow covered their knees and they could only see the color of white for as far as their sight went. Heaven and earth seemed to be merged together. When you looked down the mountain, the world down there was buried in mist, which could not be seen through clearly. The vision ahead made one feel as if they were lost in a world of white, which could never be crossed. Some less determined minds might probably flinch at the sight of it. Here, it was higher than the mountain that Mai had led them to before. Xiao Xuan was looking at one of the mountains inside a mountain range. When you looked afar, you could see the white mountain peaks for 1,000 miles. What is this place? Mao looked at the strange scenery and asked anxiously. He remembered the places that he had been to before and even the scenery nearby. However, he felt completely unfamiliar with the things he was seeing now. When they were escaping, it felt not far, but judging from the circumstances now, they realized that they were in big trouble. It was impossible to stay here for long, so Xiao Xuan decided to head down the mountain first. At least they would go to somewhere warmer. In his heart, Xiao Xuan was still worrying about Old Kei's tooth sword. When Old Kei had given him that sword, he had held it in front of Old Kei and told him to rest assured, for he promised to take good care of the sword. However, the sword was gone now. They headed down the mountain, and after they had gone through the mist, scenery from down the mountain began to appear. In these mountains, there was no vegetation in the snow-covered area, while down here there was a lot of green that enjoyed short winters and long summers. They were almost two different worlds. After walking for some time, they saw a big chunk of snow and a thin layer of snow that was melting under the sun. The chunk began to reveal its true appearance under the snow, black scales. The sword sticking out indicated that it was the thorn Black Wind's head, and Xiao Xuan quickly confirmed that. A ball of snow fell down along with the melted snow water, with traces of red mixed in. Xiao Xuan looked closely and found that the sword pierced through for over half its length instead of the previous 1/3. Around the sword, there was some frozen blood. Thorn Black Wind's thorns and scales, which usually looked majestic while standing straight, had now all lowered, not moving at all. Xiao Xuan closed his eyes after indicating Mao not to move. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a giant skeleton in his view. Unlike yesterday, the huge ferocious beast had quite a few broken bones now, as if it had hit something hard. Even if it was still alive, it would be severely injured. And the head, the sword got stabbed in deeper into the skull. If not for the sword, Xiao Xuan would be heading down the mountain without any hesitation, and he would never try to examine if that thorn Black Wind was still alive. It had better be dead, for even if it was barely alive, with Xiao Xuan's condition, he had no confidence in beating it. Xiao Xuan made a heart snowball with the snow he gathered, and then tossed it towards the sword. The sword trembled, while the huge ferocious beast did not move. After attesting a few times, Xiao Xuan finally confirmed that the ferocious beast that dominated on the top of the food chain in the basin was actually dead. Flaming Horn's tribe. The life inside the tribe was just as calm and peaceful as always. Early in the morning, Old Kei tossed Caesar some meat and bones, then grabbed a stoneware and began polishing it as he sat there. He looked the same old way, without any facial expression or any words. However, people familiar with him could still figure it out that Old Kei had been not quite himself lately. For example, you could see it from the wooden box at the corner for waste residue. All the residue after carving off stone flakes or pieces of failed crafted items went directly there. Old Kei used to have far less wasted there. Caesar, who was gnawing on a bone lackadaisically in the corner, seemed to be skinnier than before. It was not because of Old Kei not willing to feed him, he got skinnier because of its low spirit and loss of appetite. So he seemed bony now. Caesar's ear moved a little and looked at the window as he was chewing on the bone slowly. Soon, a person came in through the window from the outside. Before he landed, he pushed off with a finger against the ground, and with that strength he flipped in the air as if avoiding something. What? Ji landed steadily, and he looked around his surroundings. By the window was the trap he triggered on his last visit. Originally he was prepared for something new popping out from the ground, however, unexpectedly there was nothing at all. This is not right. Ji squatted down as he narrowed his eyes and scanned the room, not letting any detail escape his sight. Caesar stared at Ji with a bone in his mouth, for he didn't understand why this person had to roll over when he came in. After confirming there was no other trap, Ji finally stood up. In fact, the few traps that he triggered before were still the way he left them, and Old Kei did not even bother to clear the scene. "Hey, how's everything going, Old Kei?" Ji came to Old Kei's side and handed him a few animal meat chunks and 2 fine stone cores which he pulled out from a hide bag. "My son is joining the next hunting mission, hence I need your help to craft something for him." Old Kei did not respond to his words, while he continued on working on the stuff he had at hand. Ji didn't mind at all, because he knew Old Kei had already heard that. He just put the things aside and dragged over a stone stool as if he were in his own house. Ji gazed at the stone sword that Old Kei was working on and said, "Xuan and the others have probably already started hunting at the first location. What do you think he will bring back from his first hunting mission?" Old K hesitated for a moment at G's words. But he kept silent as he continued on crafting. Seeing Old K like this, G finally ascertained what Old K was worrying about. Old K had no wife and fathered no children in his life. As a youth it was okay for him to live that way, but later on when he had to quit from the hunting team because of the leg, his temper grew more and more weird. People found him difficult to get along with, and almost no kid would come to be on congenial terms with him. Even those who came to him to learn stone crafting skills never stuck to it. Finally, Ashwin entered his life, and Old K almost treated him like his own son. When kids went on their first hunting trip, their elders and relatives would naturally worry. So most of the parents chose to go out with their children, for at least they could have the chance to look after their own kids. Personally joining in the battle was better than trusting the kids to others' attendance after all. If Old K weren't injured, he probably would have taken Ashwin out during the first hunting mission this year, however. Don't worry. Ashwin is a quick-witted boy who got awakened at such a young age. Let alone that he is favored by the shaman. He will be fine, and you should just patiently wait for them to return on the path of glory. Didn't you give him your tooth sword? He'll be fine. He told us to rest assured, right? He knows better. At the same time, on the other side of the mountains, away from the tribe, Xiaoxuan, who knows better and told them to rest assured, was sighing at the tooth sword. After confirming the thorn black wind's death, Xiaoxuan pulled out the sword. It took him a lot of strength to do that, for the knife was stuck in the thorn black wind's skull. According to the traces on the ground and the thorn black wind's condition, Xiaoxuan suspected perhaps the giant beast had hit on a huge rock when it got flushed by the avalanche. Later, it rolled down the mountain, and the thorn black wind got buried here deep. The broken bones on its body should be caused by the hit, while the tooth sword stabbed deeper into its skull during the process. One could only say that this thorn black wind had bad luck. If it weren't Xiaoxuan who tagged along with the hunting trip, if it were any other newly awakened kid, such events would not have happened at all. Without Xiaoxuan, the thorn black wind would have been able to get its sweet revenge back in the cave. After pulling out the tooth sword, Xiaoxuan noticed that its tip had broken off for about an inch, and there were quite a few breaches on the chipped blade. Besides, the tooth sword was filled with scratch marks. He wondered what for amazed expression would Old Keys have when he presents the sword in front of Old K after he returns. Also, Ji would probably cry seeing the sword. He had longed for this sword since forever, and he always touched it gently. However, his precious was roughly handled by Xiaoxuan and ended up like that. As Xiaoxuan was sighing at the sword, Mao was feeling blank-faced with the dead body of that thorn black wind in front of him. He had never expected such a giant monster dying just like that. In all the stories that he had heard before, primary totemic warriors would never have any chance if faced with such a high-level ferocious beast, unless they fought in large quantities. As for newly awakened warriors, they should never think about confronting something like that. Once they encountered a ferocious beast, old experienced warriors would just command them to stand aside by one single shout of "Kids, get far away." Mao felt more than excited, feeling the hard scales and thorns of the thorn black wind with his palm. Even though he did not help much during the hunting, he felt quite agitated just to witness such special hunting and retaliation battle. Also, the untouchable image of thorn black winds also faded for some extent in his heart. Just one touch. Then another touch. Oh my goodness, look at the teeth. Definitely have to touch those. He should be the first one to touch the teeth of an adult thorn black wind among his generation in the tribe. Think about that. So when Xiaoxuan looked over in Mao's direction, he found an odd image of Mao forcing apart the thorn black wind's jaw with his bare hands, and craning his neck to look inside. What the FCK are you looking at? Xiaoxuan rushed to his side and kicked Mao away. Aren't you afraid to be bitten to death in case it wasn't dead yet, you moron? Didn't you say that it is dead already? Mao swiped off the snow on his clothes and got back on his feet. Not paying any attention to Xiaoxuan's kick, Mao continued to stare at the thorn black wind enthusiastically. People in the tribe always had a weird enthusiasm towards high-level prey, which Xiaoxuan never understood. Do you believe whatever I say? What if I was wrong? Didn't you notice that I was extremely nervous when I pulled out the sword? Or did you not even notice that I stood so far away from that thing after I pulled out the sword? Even though Xiaoxuan was positive that the thorn black wind was dead, with so many incomprehensible factors in this world, Xiaoxuan felt it was better to be more cautious with that unfamiliar species. The chopped-off snake head could sometimes still bite people. Who knew whether that thorn black wind did not have such behavior? Before he could finish his sentence, Xiaoxuan, together with Mao, heard the sound of a wooden whistle. It was not near, but according to its rhythm, it was from their hunting group. Xiao Xuan immediately showed a joyful face and raised up his arm and whistled with curled thumb and index finger in his mouth. Different rhythms of whistles represented different meanings in the tribe. Xiao Xuan knew that because every hunting warrior needed to remember them. Seeing Xiao Xuan made whistle loudly with his fingers, Mao copied his movement as well. However, Mao almost used up all his saliva yet could not make any whistling sound. Leng Ga, Ang and some other warriors came to find them. When seeing that Xiao Xuan and Mao were intact, Leng Ga almost shed some tears in his red eyes. But soon, when they laid eyes on the giant figure in the snow, those warriors nearly slipped down on the ground. The snow was melting quickly, and the dreadful killer of the night was just lying there with its belly on the ground in silence, lifeless. What's that? Leng Ga grabbed the long spear in his hands tightly and asked in a shaky voice, as he pointed at it with a shaky finger. Aang and the others also swallowed down their saliva, waiting for Xiao Xuan's answer. Although they could guess what it was, the guess appeared to be too unbelievable to be true. They could not believe in their guess, and some of them even wondered if it was just a dream. Yesterday, when they saw the chaos in that cave, many of them had prepared to face the fact that they might never see those two kids again. It was a sleepless night as they had been searching all night. At first they could see some traces of them, for example the items that they lost along the way. However, after they had entered the snowy region, it became nearly impossible for them to find any more footprints, so all of the rest relied on luck. While searching, they had long gone beyond their hunting area. They had met with another hunting group, and the other hunting group joined the search. But the longer it took, the heavier their heart grew. In this forest, it was difficult for cubs to stay alive. Humans and animals were the same at that point. Now, seeing that Mao and Xiao Xuan were both okay, Leng Ga and the others were of course happy, for that was already far better than their expectation. Only few people could escape from a thorn-black wind. However, with the big guy lying there, facing the ground, it was like their wildest dream. Is it really dead? With the big hole in its head, and so much blood coming out of there, it should be dead, right? After poking it for a few times with the long spear, Leng Ga and the others became bolder. Like Mao's previous behavior, they now paid no more attention to Xiao Xuan and Mao, while all of them circled around the thorn-black wind's dead body, poking at it as a sign to show their amazement. It's the one from last time. Look at its tail, there's still a wound. Hey, look at the thick skin and the thorns, oh, it can't be broken off. Here, Xuan, hold my stone spear, I don't believe I can't break it. The thorns are so hard, if Mai had chopped at the layer of thorns, perhaps its tail wouldn't have been injured so badly. Hey, look at its claw. So sharp, wow. Standing on the side, Xiao Xuan got a headache watching these people's behavior. A minute ago people were shedding tears on that warm reunion, and 1 minute later, he and Mao were ignored. Luckily, Leng Ga still remembered to notify the other warriors down the mountain, and sent a message with that whistle. Originally they planned to take Xiao Xuan and Mao down the mountain to meet with the others, but with the dead thorn-black wind's presence, they changed their mind and called the others to come up here. It would be such a waste to just leave the beast to rot here. The warriors would all be pepped up if they carried it back. The competition between the two hunting teams was quite intense, so every time when they returned, they would brag about their prey. It would be so cool if they could bring back this big ferocious beast. When Mai and the others arrived, Leng Ga was holding one of the thorn-black wind's big claws in his arms, touching it constantly. Similar to the others who met the thorn-black wind earlier, these people also had their eyes wide open and were dumbstruck. Later, just as Xiao Xuan's predicted, they too circled around the body immediately. Are you hurt? Mai came to Xiao Xuan and Mao, quite relieved. I'm fine. Xiao Xuan moved his arms and legs, and jumped for a few times. In fact, he had broken a few ribs and an arm last night, but fortunately it was not severe and now he had recovered mostly already. Probably it was because of the totemic power. After confirming that Xiao Xuan and Mao were really fine, Mai finally relieved himself from the stress and pressure. Since everyone was asking about their encounter, Xiao Xuan briefly explained what had happened last night. Mao was adding on from the side. He had not completely calmed down before yet, but as they at last were picked up by the group, he finally let loose and became more talkative. So Mao bragged about his experience to the crowd ceaselessly. Xiao Xuan did not tell the others the fact that he could see skeletons, and all he claimed was he had better sight at night than the others. Besides, from start to finish, a large part of it was thanks to luck. Warriors of the other hunting group also came here with Mai. After listening to Xiao Xuan's story, they sighed. It turned out you were the ones responsible for the noise up in the mountain last night. Last night, people from the other hunting team also heard the rumbling noise up in the mountain. It was just that they were far away from the sound, so they did not worry about being influenced by the avalanche. Also, they did not plan to come to search the region, for basically no one would survive from such enormous momentum. The leader from the other hunting group looked at Mai enviously, for he had foreseen the great welcome that they would receive when they returned on the path of glory. It was absurd for them to just leave the thorn black wind here. Like other prey, they planned to dissect it first. According to the rules in the hunting teams, Xiao Xuan should lead the dissection, for it was his prey. However, Xiao Xuan now did not have the strength to do so yet, for the layer of scale of thorn black wind was too thick to cut. Even though there were no scales in its stomach, it was too difficult for Xiao Xuan to control the knife. So, under Mai and some other warriors' guidance, Xiao Xuan made a few cuts and Mai took it from there. If the prey were put down by the joint efforts of warriors, the organs that got dissected should be distributed by the leader of the hunting group, and everyone would get his part. As for how people would like to trade with each other, it would be their own business. Aside from the organs, the meat would be distributed later when they get back. But now, the thorn black wind was hunted down by Xiao Xuan and Mao. Even if it was more of a thing of luck, it was their prey. So all the guts belonged to Xiao Xuan and Mao, while the others had to trade for it if they wanted any. After pulling out all its guts, Mai and the others said goodbye to the other hunting group, and they began to pull the thorn black wind back with joint strength. There was a giant cave excavated near the mountaintop, where the hunting group went to yesterday. Inside the giant cave was a lot of processed game stored, for it was colder there, and the meat could be stored for a longer time. Besides, high-level game like the four-fanged wild boar and the thorn black wind would decay more slowly. That was also a reason why totemic warriors preferred to hunt for high-level game. Because of that, each location would have at least 2 caves. One was for resting, which was located near the mountainside or someplace warmer and concealed. The other was built to store food, and it would be located near the mountain top that was covered with snow all year long. After all, it would take about 20 days for each hunting trip. After taking the thorn black wind to the food storing cave, people headed towards the mountainside, because Mai wanted to find another cave for resting. The one they had could not be used anymore. Mai. Xuan. Finally, you came back. The 5 people staying at the former cave were thrilled to see Xiao Xuan and Mao coming back, safe and sound. However, they had other things to report. Yesterday after you left, we heard the howling of thorn black winds down the mountain. 2 of them. I approached to see what was happening, and I saw those 2 who stopped us earlier, fighting against each other. I did not have the chance to get closer, and after observing for a while, I came back. Mai thought about it for a while. He commanded the others to stay at the cave for now, and took some mid-level totemic warriors to head down to check it out first. When Xiao Xuan had finished eating some roasted meat, Mai came back hurriedly, with joyful expression on his face. He asked the others to come down and help. It turned out that the 2 thorn black winds fought brutally over the control of the territory. One was defeated and had been nearly ripped apart with only skeleton remaining. The other one was badly injured, with quite a few parts revealing the bones, and one of its hind legs was almost broken. When Mai took the people there, that thorn black wind who won was resting in the forest. The lake was a little far from the battlefield. Since it was badly injured, it probably planned to rest in the woods for a few days, before it would enter the lake. Unexpectedly, Mai and the others took advantage of its injuries and killed it directly. Do you think that the first one knew that these 2 would have such a bloody fight when it asked for their help? Lang Ga asked. Xiao Xuan was thinking about the same question? Perhaps that one did know what would happen when it sacrificed its territory to ask for help. If things went smoothly, it could kill the kids in the hunting group, and then wait patiently for the 2 down the mountain to fight each other to the death. When one was defeated and the other was weak, it would go back and take back its territory. Hence, it could not only get its revenge, it might be able to expand its land by having the other 2 killed. No one knew the truth, for all 3 of them were dead and their bodies were dragged to the food-storing cave by the hunting group. A herd of giant antlered deers was wandering along a stream, while some predators' movements nearby was making them anxious. About a few hundred meters away from the herd, Xiao Xuan hid himself behind some dense branches as he stood on a tall tree. He looked in the deer's direction through the leaves. It was the 5th day since they came out for hunting, and since they had hunted enough game already around their first location, Mai planned to take the hunting group to head to the second location. The second location was located at the other side of the basin, so they had to go through the basin and then climb over yet another mountain to reach it. With Xiao Xuan and Mao tagging along with the hunting group, Mai did not intend to move straight through the basin. Instead, Mai told the group to march along the basin's edge. The distance was longer this way, but it was not as dangerous as walking straight through. During their journey, the group encountered a large herd of giant antlered deers, with a pack of wolves following them. Mai commanded the others to hide themselves first and then asked Xiao Xuan to observe the wolves in the forest. Xiao Xuan kept a wolf himself, and Mai was worried that he hadn't seen a real wolf in the wild. In fact, Caesar was not considered a real wolf in most of warriors' eyes, so he would hate it if Xiao Xuan's impression of wolves was based on Caesar's tame behavior. However, Mai and the others actually worried for nothing. Of course Xiao Xuan knew what wolves were like in the wild, or else he wouldn't be treating Caesar as a dog. But the wolves here were much stronger than the wolves that Xiao Xuan had seen in his last life. They had stronger muscles and were very destructive. Judging from their head and jaws, one could tell that they had much more force in their bites. In fact, they would hunt for giant prey that were much bigger than themselves in sizes. Now those wolves were just lurking around, for before any action, they had to assess the risk first. They preferred to avoid the deers with bigger antlers, like those ones. Mai pointed some out for Xiao Xuan. Among the herd of the giant antlered deer, there were a lot of male deer with big antlers, some of which had really unique antlers. Unlike other deer, their antlers were not like branches that stretched out, but forked out backwards several times, covering their whole bodies. Those were extremely difficult to deal with. Xiao Xuan had seen similar antlers in the tribe, for some people were wearing those when attending the ritual ceremony. "It's going to happen," Lang Ga said in a low voice as he squatted on the tree beside them. He was quite excited. In fact, Lang Ga became excited every time he saw a pack of wolves hunting together. He thought that he could learn a lot from their hunting skills and fighting. The best way to hunt down herd creatures like the giant antlered deer is to make them run. Mai whispered. Xiao Xuan looked at the wolves and noticed that at first the wolves were just like taking a stroll, but then they gradually split up and slowly approached the deer herd. Some of the wolves even tried to intimidate the deers on the edge. Because of the approaching wolf pack, the deer herd began to panic, and quickly there was chaos in the herd from the wolves' threat. The deers began to run, and some of them even headed in different directions. The wolves separated as they chased after the giant antlered deer herd, searching for suitable targets. Baby deers would be protected in the center of the herd, with strong and big individuals protecting them. Normally, the wolf pack would not try to hunt them down. But as for those who ran towards different directions, it was pretty easy for the wolves to pick out those wounded or old ones. Once those weak or the wounded ones were spotted, all wolves would give up chasing after the others and focus on those less able ones. Mai pointed at the running wolves and explained to Xiao Xuan. After some hesitation, he added, "So even if you are wounded, you should never show your weakness in front of them. Also, never show the pack your back, which is too dangerous." Xiao Xuan had not found out which of the deers were the less abled ones, but one of the wolves suddenly sped up and chased after one particular deer. Soon, 6 or 7 wolves joined the chase. As the time went by, more and more wolves joined the chase. The biggest and strongest wolf among the pack should be the leader, and it was the one that started the attack. However, it was a shame that because of the help from some other deers, their prey finally slipped away. They won't give up without a prey. Lang Ga was positive. At that end, the wolves came back together soon after the failure. Perhaps they were in tumult because of the failure in hunting this time. However, the chaos soon calmed down by the leader. It howled at the sky and Xiao Xuan felt that it must be increasing the morale. Soon, the wolf pack started yet another attack towards the deer herd. One wolf focused on an old deer, while the others quickly joined in. With last time's experience and the lesson that they learned, this time they chased the deer to an empty ground and separated it from the herd. So it fell into a situation of isolation and helplessness. Seeing such a crazy chase, and even though he was looking from quite a distance, and was already mentally prepared, Xiao Xuan was still deeply shocked. Perhaps the biggest fear for the prey was to encounter such well-organized predators with ferocious eyes and being chased after by a group of them. The leader was rushing in the front of the pack, and it suddenly pounced at the deer's back when it got near. The sharp teeth pierced through the deer's skin, and its big body, which was even larger than most normal wolves, directly slammed on the deer like a hammer. Although the old giant antlered deer was a few times bigger than the wolf's leader, it staggered from the pounce and almost fell down to the ground. It was just a beginning. After the leader wolf, soon other wolves in the pack began to attack as well. Their teeth went through its skin and pierced its muscles. The giant antlered deer that was besieged almost became a wolf hanger. Finally, it slowed down and fell, but its body did not stop struggling until its last breath. Maybe a wolf alone was not lethal at all, but dozens of the terrifying predators combined were a real danger. Because of such hunting tactics, they were able to scare off most of the predators in this region. Sometimes I would rather confront ferocious beasts like the thorn black wind than face a pack of wolves. Some warrior in the hunting group said. Luckily, thorn black winds prefer to live alone. Even if they united temporarily, they wouldn't be able to fight like that. They liked to live alone and despise teamwork. It was rare enough for those two thorn black winds to cooperate to block their way, but they would never fight together desperately against the warriors. But then, I have not figured out where they keep their baby wolves by now. Leng Ga looked around and said. It was totally a coincidence that they picked up Caesar when that little cub was alone. Most of the social animals did a good job protecting their babies. For example, the giant antlered deer or the wolf pack, which was about to start eating. However, for animals like the thorn black winds, no matter how powerful and arrogant they were, their babies might get targeted by other ferocious beasts if they did not take good care of their babies. Even without a fae, there might have been other hunters like tigers, like leopards and wolves. After all, the wounded, the old, and especially the babies are best hunting targets in the wilderness, said Mai. Also, down in the bottom of the lake, where that thorn black wind which lost its baby lived, there were numerous animals' bones, regardless of the age or the size. The world in the forest was just as brutal as that, filled with killing and being killed. So, grow up quickly. Kiao smiled at Xiao Xuan and Mao. After collecting their equipment, the hunting group headed to the second location. As they were running and jumping on the boughs, Xiao Xuan looked back at the wolf pack that had started eating. The strong leader howled and brutally bit the others that approached to the prey. It used that way to defend its dominant position in the pack. While the others that were not bitten by the leader yet quickly nibbled on the giant antlered deer, as if the prey would stand up and run away if they were too slow to eat. Compared with that, what was Caesar doing now, as he was treated and kept like a dog since its childhood? Was he lazily gnawing on a bone while bathing in the sun? In the wild, the vulnerable and weak ones were more susceptible to attacks, so Xiao Xuan had been paying extra attention to the surroundings. He was merely a newly awakened boy, and in the eyes of animals, especially ferocious beasts, he was one of the two weakest ones in the group. When they arrived at the other side of the basin, it was almost dusk. Xiao Xuan thought that there would be a cave to rest. After all, the rule in the hunting team was no hunting at night. Staying out at night was far too dangerous, and resting without a cave also seemed to be unsafe in such an environment. To Xiao Xuan's surprise, the cave of the second location was not on this side of the mountain. The second hunting location was located at the other side of the mountain, but Xiao Xuan looked up at the mountain, whose peak and border could not be seen at all. It would be extremely difficult for them to climb over that mountain. Even with the strength of a totemic warrior, it might take them more than a whole day to get there. Let alone that it was already late, and there were some glinting eyes staring at them from the woods. Instead of stopping there, Mai continued to lead the group up the mountain. Near the mountainside there was indeed a cave, a big one, which was neither formed naturally, nor excavated by people from the tribe. In fact, it was drilled out by some kind of creature. Specifically, it was a passage. Every time when hunting groups came here, they would have to go through the mountain to get to the other side. On the wall, near the entrance of the cave, there were a lot of names carved out. At the end of the name list, Xiao Xuan found Mai's name carved on the wall. Every group leader would carve his name on the wall when he led his group through the passage. All the names above were carved by former leaders of hunting groups. When Mai becomes too old to serve as the hunting group's leader, there would be a new leader selected, and the new leader would carve his name after Mai when he comes here one day. For them, it was a symbol of honor. Before they enter the cave, warriors in the hunting group needed to hold a small ceremony to show their appreciation towards their ancestors who had established this hunting route. Mai put down the long spear beside his feet and got down on one knee. With his palms facing each other, he raised his hands in front of his forehead and bowed towards the wall full of names. To our ancestors. Thank the ancestors. Xiao Xuan followed the example of the other warriors of their hunting group and gave the same salute to show appreciation. It said that every hunting route that the hunting groups went along were established by the ancestors. Long time ago, when there weren't enough men in the tribe, there weren't many hunting groups. So every time they went hunting, they would try new routes. One time they would take this route, next time they would take another. Later on, there were more people in the hunting group, so different teams were established and each hunting group would follow one of the routes that was established by their ancestors. The reason for following the routes was to avoid those unforeseen and unpredictable factors. What kinds of animals lived along the route? How many of them were ferocious beasts? How was the geography? All those questions could be answered from the experiences which were passed on by the previous generations. However, if you went on a new route, you might not be able to quickly react towards incidents, which would lead to a huge loss. Of course, the hunting route was just a rough direction made by the ancestors, and people could feel free to make smaller decisions along the path. For example, the route for Mai's group was to climb over the mountain where the first location was, and then go through the basin, and then get to the other side of this mountain. What if some in the tribe had their own ideas of establishing a new route? Well, only if the shaman and the chief both agreed to it, else the others would just forget about it. What, are you delusional? Trying to create a new hunting route by your own? Could you be stronger than the ancestors? No, you couldn't. Also, new hunting routes could not be established easily nor freely. Unless you think the old route was not good. It didn't make any sense. You dare doubt the ancestors? Do you have a death wish? People in the tribe had a peculiar, stubborn attitude towards things that were passed down by the ancestors. Even though some of the decisions were not quite suitable in Xiaoshuan's eyes, however, people in the tribe respected them as sacred rules. Except for the loyalty towards the totem, people in the tribe had reverence and immense trust for the ancestors, which went beyond Xiaoshuan's imagination. Even if the ancestors climbed out of their graves and claimed that there was only one moon in the sky, people in the tribe would nod and agree without any second thought. That was also the result achieved by all those years of brainwashing education from the shamans. Generations after generations, the same ideas were passed down. When the group leaders were out on a mission, they always thought that they could only face their ancestors with integrity if they went on the pre-existing routes. It was also considered as the respect towards the ancestors that established the hunting routes. Looking at the names on the list at the entrance of the cave, those leaders shared similar thoughts. After entering the cave and starting a bonfire, warriors in the hunting group did not walk any deeper inside. According to old habits, they would spend the night near the entrance and then head inside early tomorrow morning. Going through the cave would cost some time, for it was not a straight route. How come there is a cave that connects both sides of the mountain? Xiaoshuan asked Lang Ga when they were resting beside the bonfire. This cave was already there when our ancestors first came here. It said that a giant king stone worm lives in this mountain, and all the curvy paths in the cave were drilled out by it. Lang Ga said. Stone worm. Xiaoshuan was stunned, for the round passage was at least 10 meters high. Also, Mai and the others had mentioned that aside from the passage that connected both sides of the mountain, there were lots of other passages that went up or down. Who could have imagined that a cave and passages of such scale were drilled out by a stone worm? How big would it be? The stone worms that Xiaoshuan used as fishing baits could never be compared with it. However, it was a story from the ancestors who established this hunting route, and it remains to be confirmed whether there really was a stone worm. Then, have any of our ancestors seen the stone worm below the mountain? Xiaoshuan asked. It had been many years since the first hunting group came. Even if the warriors were only using the cave as a passage, someone should have seen the stone worm, right? I don't think anyone has seen it. Seeing that Xiaoshuan was still in doubt, Lang Ga explained more, but if you listen carefully, you can hear the sound created by the king stone worm. Xiaoshuan listened carefully, and there were indeed some whirring sounds. However, they weren't necessarily caused by the stone worm. Since there were lots of caves and holes, when wind blew inside from one hole and went out through the other holes, it would also create such sounds. Although his heart was filled with doubts, Xiaoshuan figured he would not get another answer seeing Lang Ga's attitude. Instead of arguing with those stubborn people, Xiaoshuan changed the subject. So what's on the other side of the mountain? Are there any differences? As expected, Lang Ga's attention soon was shifted. Differences. In fact, the biggest difference is that there are a lot of giant birds on the other side. Lang Ga stretched out his arms to gesticulate. Although Lang Ga's arms were limited in length, judging from his exaggerated facial expression, Xiaoshuan knew that the birds must be quite big. In fact, recalling carefully, Xiaoshuan noticed that since he had entered the woods, there weren't many large fierce birds. Even though Xiaoshuan felt that some of the birds they saw were pretty big, based on Lang Ga's description, on the other side of the mountain, there lived some bigger and fiercer birds. Perhaps the feathery decorations that some warriors put on at the ritual ceremony of the snow festival were obtained on the other side of the mountain. After a night's sleep, the hunting group gathered their things and started to go through the mountain early the next day. Xiaoshuan had a pretty good sleep and he did not see anything terrible in his dreams. Everyone, stay close together, especially Xuan and Mao. This is your first time going this way, so I need you to promise to focus, for you may never have the chance to come out if you get left behind. Mai said seriously. He was not trying to intimidate but only telling the truth. Even the few generations of their ancestors paid a heavy price before they could finally find the correct way out when this hunting route was first established. In this huge maze, numerous warriors went in but never managed to find their way out. "Okay. We'll pay extra attention. You rest assured," said Xiao Xuan. Mao also nodded. In the hunting group, he had always been disciplined, and he also knew that it was always better to listen to the elder warrior's words. It became darker as they went deeper inside. People in the hunting group were separated into a few smaller groups, and there was someone holding a torch in every small group. When they left the entrance behind, the only light source came from the torches. It was not very bright, but good enough for them to see their feet. It was just like how Mai had described it to Xiao Xuan. In this cave, the deeper you went in, the more complicated you would find it to be. There were many intersections and crossings inside. Sometimes you would even find 3 forks when you make a simple turn. However, the hunting group would only choose one of them, which they had always chosen in the past. Even if there was more than one way that connected with the outside, someone who didn't know the way would easily get lost when he went inside. Perhaps he would return to his starting point after walking in circles. Probably because there was more than one exit, people didn't feel suffocated inside. There was always a gust of breeze, with a rhythmic pulse, which sounded like the breath of some large animal. Currently, they didn't see any aggressive creatures, but it was said that some worms and spiders lived in this cave. The paths inside were not only curvy, but also rose and dipped constantly. Sometimes the path headed down, while sometimes one had to climb up a really steep slope, during which all the totemic warriors needed to pay attention not to be left behind. Basically, those who were familiar with the path the most were those experienced old warriors in the hunting group. Those young warriors like Lang Ga might not remember the route clearly. Actually, someone had thought about making marks on the wall before. However, every time when they went inside again, those marks made last time would completely disappear. All these events together made the hunting team increase their belief in the ancestors' conclusion that there must be a king stone worm living inside this mountain. It was just that no one had seen it yet. So later on, warriors in the hunting team stopped trying to leave a mark on the wall. Also, they tried to be quiet and make no loud sound when they went through the cave in order to not wake up that giant creature living inside. In the tribe, the stone worm seemed harmless. However, it was not the same when it came to the king stone worm. Or else how could it be addressed as king? Just the same as when they were traveling through the woods, Xiao Xuan and Mao were in the middle of the group in order to get better protection from the others. Xiao Xuan used his special ability to observe the other parts of the cave. Sometimes he would see some worms of relatively larger sizes. However, those worms did not attack the hunting group, and the warriors in the hunting group also did not actively provoke them. First of all, Wei did not know how many similar insects were living together in the cave, and it would be pretty annoying if they drew the attention of a swarm of them. Secondly, no one wanted to make a scene in the cave, for it would be a real disaster if they woke up the big guy in the mountain. If it was a straight route, it wouldn't have taken them such a long time to come out. But in fact, they only heard Mai saying we are almost there when they had been walking for half a day later. After yet another turn, they finally came to a tunnel with a fork. Only one of them was the way out, but right now, both passages were blocked by spiders. That was a kind of eyeless spider. Perhaps their eyes had degenerated because they had been living in the dark cave for many generations. The body of this spider was not large, but they did have pretty long legs, which could cover the entrance of the passage. Mai and 2 other warriors who were at the head of the group used torches and long spears to silently threaten the spiders blocking the entrances. The spiders felt the fierce heat from the flames waving at them and retreated. On the passage that led to the outside, only 2 eyeless spiders were blocking their way. Compared with the other passage, there were much less spiders. Because of the waving torch, spiders in both sides began to move and they were threateningly waving their pincers and fangs towards the hunting group. Ignore them. Let's just go. On his side, Mai had already driven away those 2 eyeless spiders, and he shouted out to tell the other warriors to keep up with him. Based on his experience, the eyeless spiders would rarely fight persistently against humans, for their prey were the kinds of worms in the cave. So in theory, as long as they stayed calm and tried not to irritate them, they could avoid conflict with a little compromise on both sides. However, the accident happened just at that time. Xiao Xuan in the middle of the group felt a chill on his neck and was immediately alarmed. Glaring at the eyeless spiders with their trembling pincers, he realized that it was not them. Xiao Xuan suddenly looked up, only to find a black shadowy whip drop down like lightning, and all Xiao Xuan could do was block it with his sword. However, he got coiled up tight by that whip and was pulled up. It all happened in the blink of an eye, and since most warriors in the hunting group were focusing on guarding against the eyeless spiders nearby, nobody expected there to be something else above them. It seemed not to be the eyeless spiders, but whoever saw it did not have the time to stop it. Ah Xuan. My. Ah Xuan got pulled away. Why is there a hole above? It wasn't there when we came in last time. What was that? At that time, the crowd did not intend to make any compromise. They fought fiercely to force back those eyeless spiders, they even wounded a few of them. However, Xiao Xuan was dragged away from above, and it was not so easy for them to climb up. Mai commanded the others to deal with the eyeless spiders, while he climbed up along the wall into that hole. A while later, Mai came back with a pale face. Whatever creature dragged Xiao Xuan away, it was too fast for Mai to chase. When Mai climbed up there, it had already gone, and Xiao Xuan's shouting could not be heard again. What's more, there were different forks when Mai went up. Different forks were stretching towards different directions. After several attempts, Mai had to go back without success. In the heart of the mountain, those creatures which had been living in this darkness for a long period of time had a far better understanding of the cave. Mai had to go back to the group out of the worries for the others. He was the group leader after all, and he had to be responsible to the other 30 warriors. Mai went back to deal with the growing number of eyeless spiders with the others in the group, after he punched at the wall in anger. The situation had grown more and more bad for them, and warriors in the hunting group had no other option than to rush out along that passage. It was not far from the outside, and they all knew that none of the spiders would chase them out, for they could not endure the light. It happened a lot that a hunting group had 1 or 2 casualties. This time it was Xiao Xuan, later on the others could be facing the same fate. Those young warriors like Lang Ga were not that sensible and they wanted to go inside again to search for Xiao Xuan. However, they were stopped by the others. The older warriors were already used to that kind of farewells. Many warriors were still sighing in their mind. Why did Ah Xuan have to be so unlucky? He was in the center of every storm, and it was his first hunting trip. Not long after, people in the hunting group saw traces of light, and those eyeless spiders stopped their chase. While on the other side, Xiao Xuan, who got dragged away, was not feeling good as well. The thing that pulled him up was a kind of insect that lived in the cave. It was a little smaller than the eyeless spider, but was just as fierce and fast. The thing that coiled up Xiao Xuan was the insect's feeler, on whose tip there were hook-like serrations. If it weren't for Xiao Xuan's quick reaction to hold up the sword against those serrations, he could have easily gotten wounded when he was dragged away. The sword and serrations even created crackling sounds as they rubbed against each other. After struggling really hard, Xiao Xuan only got loosened up just a little bit. After a sharp turn, Xiao Xuan was directly slammed onto a stone wall and he nearly threw out all his breakfast. With pain all over his body, Xiao Xuan put himself together and finally pulled out his toothed sword, which had already lost its tip, and fiercely chopped on that feeler. Pa! The feeler which was binding Xiao Xuan was chopped off, and its owner began to jump up and down out of the pain of losing its feeler. In the meantime, Xiao Xuan was finally freed, but he rolled over and fell into another hole, which headed down steeply. Before he could stand up on his feet, he slid down along that slope. He did now know how long he had been sliding, but when he could finally stand up, Xiao Xuan felt dizzy in the head and dim in sight. He felt painful and sour all over his body, for he had hit the wall for quite a few times and was dragged a long way. It took him some time to catch his breath, after which Xiao Xuan wanted to go back along the same way, for it would become more and more dangerous if he stayed there for too long. Just when he was about to climb up the slope, Xiao Xuan heard the sound of a breeze coming from a tunnel in his back. It was like a breeze, but with the rhythm of a breath. Initially, it was just a slight indistinct whirring noise. It could have easily been confused with the other noises among the tunnel. However, it gradually became clearer. Xiao Xuan thought about the story he heard from Lang Ga, which said that there was a king stone worm living inside the cave. Earlier, he did not quite believe in the story after all. So many hunting warriors had been here before, and none of them had ever witnessed the legendary king stone worm. Even in the stories from their ancestors, it merely was a conjecture. There was indeed a whirring noise made by the wind inside the cave, but now, Xiao Xuan was positive that it was not only the whirring noise of the wind, but also the sound of breathing mixed in with the noise. What's more, the breathing was gradually sounding closer while becoming more distinct. Xiao Xuan flexed his whole body, and he moved his legs to climb up along the slope. The slope and walls were a little bit more steep and slippery than the paths that the hunting group walked along, so climbing up the slope was more difficult. Xiao Xuan didn't dare to use the sword, for he was worried that the sound might awaken the king stone worm. Mai and the others warned that they should try to be as quiet as possible when they walked, and they certainly had a point. The breathing sound was coming closer and closer, at a speed far greater than Xiao Xuan's expectation, and it seemed to be close by in the blink of an eye. It was a little moist inside. An odor of limes filled the air, and the odor grew denser as time went by. Xiao Xuan could clearly feel the rising humidity inside, while the wall he was climbing on had tiny droplets of water, which made the wall even more slippery than before, and the climb became harder than ever. Xiao Xuan was finally able to stabilize himself after skidding a few times. It was impossible for him to climb up anymore. He could feel a layer of a slimy liquid between the wall and his palms, and it felt the same under his feet. It was hard for him to maintain his stability. He couldn't afford to slack off even a bit, because if he did, he would just slip down along the path. What the FCK? It makes no sense. A moment earlier, the wall in the cave was fine. Even though it was a bit more slippery than the paths they used to walk along, and the slope was a little steeper, it wouldn't have been a difficult task for Xiao Xuan to climb up, based on his ability. However, it hadn't been long, but the wall had changed so much. However, at that moment, there was no time for Xiao Xuan to think. The rhythmic breath was almost underneath Xiao Xuan's body. Xiao Xuan slipped, rolled and fell down onto a relatively flat surface, but after a few steps, he could see the tunnel stretching down. Xiao Xuan could only see a small part of the tunnel from where he was at, which meant that he didn't know whether there were any forks down the main path, and if so, how many forks were there. What should he do if it was really the king stone worm coming up? What should he do if the king stone worm creeps along the same tunnel that he was at? Xiao Xuan exerted all his strength on his fingers, and the tips of his fingers nearly stabbed into the wall. But that was all he could do, and his fingertips could not go any deeper inside. The stones were quite hard. Perhaps he could dig in a little more if he used his totemic power. However, Xiao Xuan didn't dare do that, for some high-level ferocious beasts were very sensitive towards totemic powers. Mai and the others didn't dare to use totemic power when they were walking through the mountain. Xiao Xuan held himself on the wall. He was so tense that he was a little stiff all over the body. On his face there was also a layer of moisture. Perhaps it was the water drops, perhaps it was his own sweat. It was not sultry in the cave. Instead, Xiao Xuan felt that it became more and more cold inside. He did not know whether the coldness was his own illusion or if it was really that cold. Also, the smell of lime grew stronger as time went by. Xiao Xuan looked up and the scenery in his vision had changed. In Xiao Xuan's view, unlike the gray stone wall, the water drops appeared to be pale white. Quickly the color of white had covered up the gray stone wall, and the coverage quickly expanded towards the top, which meant that the top of the cave was experiencing the same changes as the stone wall that Xiao Xuan was clinging on. Whir. The sound was even closer, and it sounded just beneath Xiao Xuan. Together with the breathing sound, there was also a sound of something creeping, as if some creature was crawling. Xiao Xuan silently moved closer to the wall, and he carefully controlled his breathing and heartbeat to conceal his presence. It seemed like he had already merged himself with the environment, and even if Lang Ga and the others were standing right there, there was a high chance that they might not be able to detect him. Listening to the sound beneath, Xiao Xuan thought that if the thing down there really came his way, he would have no other choice but to risk it all. If fingers weren't useful anymore, he would use the sword to keep himself steady. If the sword wasn't enough, he would use an additional spearhead. That way, he should be able to climb up, right? Although he was dragged there by that insect, he had all his equipment with him. And even though he would probably draw that thing's attention because of the use of tools, it had to be that way, for life was the topmost priority for Xiao Xuan. Aside from the breathing sound, there also seemed to be the sound of a heart beating. Dug dug, dug dug, dug dug. It was obviously not loud, but one would feel like they were being hammered on the chest. One hammer strike after another, which could make the blood surge and the heart lurch. It was like a war drum in a quiet battlefield. And the whole cave seemed to start trembling from that rhythm. The pressure came right after the sound. Or perhaps, it could be called an aura. Xiao Xuan had difficulty breathing, as if heavy dark clouds were pressing down on his head. When not relying on totemic power, Xiao Xuan's physique was still a bit too weak. Just when Xiao Xuan was paying extra attention to the approaching sound, and prepared to use his totemic power and pull out the sword to climb up, the breathing sound and thunder-like heartbeats gradually faded away. It seemed that beneath the tunnel, there were other forked paths. Luckily, that king stone worm did not come to the tunnel Xiao Xuan was at. When the sounds vanished, Xiao Xuan finally relaxed his muscles. It almost cost all his strength to hold on earlier, and now he felt exhausted. There was no action, no combat, no killing, nothing at all. All he did was holding on to the wall with everything he had. However, it was more tiring than fighting against the thorn-black wind. Just because of that, Xiao Xuan couldn't control his hands well, and in a second, he slipped and fell on the same spot where he had landed before. Xiao Xuan heard his own heart beating hard like a striking drum. He calmed down after a while. Xiao Xuan noticed something, and he looked back up at the wall that he had grabbed on. In his special view, the wall was originally covered with a layer of whiteness. However, the color of white faded away, and the change was happening gradually as the color of white reduced more and more. The air in the cave turned back to normal and became less moist. The smell of limes also disappeared gradually. Feeling a little itchy on the face, Xiao Xuan looked up and rubbed at wall only to find stone chips and powder falling down. On both of his palms there was also a layer of hard, debris-like chips and a layer of powder. He clenched his fists and felt chips and powder falling down again. Xiao Xuan climbed up towards the top as he thought about something. Without the layer of slimy liquid, the climbing became much easier. After a careful and thorough examination of the wall, Xiao Xuan noticed that his fingerprints from when he climbed on the wall had disappeared, as if he had never been there. No wonder all the marks made by the hunting warriors disappeared when the next time they went in. Perhaps the same thing happened. The cave restored its original appearance, as if no creature had come. Xiao Xuan did not go down. Instead, he chose to continue to climb up. He wanted to see if he could get back to the path which the hunting group took earlier, by climbing up. He tried hard to climb up, but as he set eyes upon the surroundings, Xiao Xuan was totally stunned. Here, it should be the place where he chopped off that insect's antennae. However, now there was no chopped off antennae, or anything else for that matter. No insect, no eyeless spiders, no sounds and no traces of any struggles. It was like everything was reinstated. In front of Xiao Xuan, there were 3 forked paths, which looked quite alike. There was no trace of any creature, so he could not tell these 3 paths apart at all. So, from which forked path was he dragged there? Xiao Xuan tried hard to recall, but he found that it was impossible. He had no idea which path to choose. Taking a deep breath, Xiao Xuan clenched his fists and cursed in a low voice, "What the FCK?" Outside the cave, Mai, Lang Ga and the others were waiting. According to the traditions in hunting groups, if anyone had an accident inside, the others would wait outside for a whole day, after which, they would continue hunting. Every year, they would lose some of their comrades, but the hunting mission had to be carried on. Everybody was the same. Xuan should be fine, right? Lang Ga walked back and forth at the exit of the cave, looking anxious. He wanted to go inside to search for him, but without knowing the correct path, he would be of no help even if he went inside. He hadn't even memorized the route near the entrance and exit, let alone all those complicated forked paths and turns inside. He wasn't as knowledgeable about the tunnels and caves as those old warriors like Mai. Now, since all the experienced ones had their hands tied, he had no other option but to wait there. Xuan is a lucky boy. He could kill a thorn black wind, so he could probably come out from the mountain. Aang added. The others also echoed with the same theory, but some experienced warriors had a different opinion. Unlike young warriors like Lang Ga, they had gone through much more than the young ones ever had. And even if they had not experienced it in person, they had heard the stories. The situation in the mountain was much trickier than meeting a thorn black wind. Killing a thorn black wind was more of a lucky shot, let alone that the thorn black wind had much lower fighting ability in a cold area, which led to the fact that it was killed by Xiao Xuan. However, it was a different situation inside. When ancestors were establishing the hunting route, they had sacrificed many people's lives to finally find a proper way to go through. However, Xiao Xuan was nothing but a newly awakened boy, who was attending the hunting mission for the first time. Regarding capability, he was not better than anyone in the hunting group. Even though they were comforting Lang Ga and the other young warriors that Xuan was a lucky boy, deep down in their hearts, those experienced warriors were thinking about why that kid was so unlucky. Earlier he had just survived from the thorn black wind, however, just in the blink of an eye, he was accidentally trapped in the mountain, nowhere to be found. New people joined, while some people would leave, or even die, depending on their fortune. Even the ancestors could not run away from their destiny. How could Xuan survive again? From the day that this route was established, no one ever came out after being left behind. It was just a pity that this time, a talented boy was lost here. They wished to see him walk on the path of glory when they returned, but nobody expected that he would be resting in the mountain forever. Well, of course, Mai wasn't in a good mood, for they had lost someone in the mountain. What's more, it was the one that he favored very much. Just because he knew what Xiao Xuan was facing with, and no one ever came out before him, Mai sat there still, in silence. He regretted very much that he wasn't more cautious. If he had noticed the hole above, if he hadn't paid so much attention on the eyeless spiders, perhaps nothing would have happened. In the meantime, Xiao Xuan was in a dilemma, not knowing which way to choose. There were 3 forking paths, and only one of them would lead him to the outside, from where he was dragged along. And no one knew where the other 2 paths led to. One misstep, he probably won't be able to come out alive. Xiao Xuan took a deep breath to ease his anxious nerves. Recalling his limited experiences, Xiao Xuan remembered that at the very night that they were awakened, the shaman had said to them when he was giving the lecture, "The power of the flame will guide you." Just like in ancient times, our ancestors used fire to light up the night. Intuition. The intuition brought by the flame. Xiao Xuan stimulated the totemic power in his body, and the flame wrapping on the flaming horns totem suddenly grew brighter in his mind. Xiao Xuan glared at the three paths in silence. After a while, Xiao Xuan lifted his foot and walked into the path in the middle. It was very quiet in the cave, no eyeless spider or any other kinds of worms could be seen. Xiao Xuan walked down along the path, but soon enough. Damn it. What intuition. What the power of the flame will guide you. Everything was fake. The shaman was just an old quack. If he were not afraid of waking that king stone worm, Xiao Xuan would probably curse out loud. He had confirmed that the path he went along now was not the same as the path through which he was dragged in. Even if he didn't remember which path it was, he still remembered the exact number of times his body was smacked against the wall. When he was dragged all the way in by that insect, his body was smacked against the wall every time there was a turn. However, now Xiao Xuan was passing through more turns than before. Also, the surroundings felt totally alien to him, and he didn't have any familiar feeling, so was his intuition on strike? Xiao Xuan rubbed his head leaning against the wall. Why did he have such bad luck? He had done nothing evil in the tribe, instead, he had helped those weak kids back in the orphan cave. Why did bad things always happen to him? Unless. Xiao Xuan thought about the ritual ceremony in the snow festival. When others were praying, he was thinking about the changes on his body. Also, he did not join the crowd to sing the song of hunting, but faked it like he was really singing. Maybe, he had to face the consequences of his prior unjust actions now. So the totem and flame that the shaman had been talking about, which were supposed to be the guardians of the warriors, chose not to protect him. That was bullshit. If it could really protect, then wouldn't that mean the ancestors in Langge's story shouldn't have died in here? Thinking about that, Xiao Xuan's face froze. If there was light inside, one could have seen traces of icy feelings in his eyes. Xiao Xuan was leaning against the wall, but he suddenly jumped up in the air. The next moment after his jump, the position he was standing at earlier were whipped hard by a shadow. Screech. The serrations on the end of the antenna cut the stone wall, which created a screeching noise. It was that insect, the one that dragged him here. After being caught once, he learned his lesson. If he fell into that same trap a second time, he would be considered stupid. In Xiao Xuan's view, that insect was formed by teeny tiny bones, and the skeleton didn't seem rigid and strong. However, in fact, it was not true. Those tiny bones could not only hold the insect's flesh tight, but also ensure that it could move faster, and when it was moving in the tunnel, it created barely any sound. Aside from the tiny bones, the insect had a layer of hard shell on its back to protect it from the outside. The most effective weapon was its antennae. But it was not a pair of the antennae now, since one of the antennae got chopped off by Xiao Xuan earlier, when it caught him. However, compared to the thorn black wind's armor of hard scales, this insect's defense was much more vulnerable. Its advantage was to sneak attack and take the other party by surprise, but when it came to actual combat, it could be defeated. They were in the territory which was under the King Stone Worm's control. Of course, the King Stone Worm would allow some nobodies to live in the mountain, but it wouldn't endure if anything threatening existed. Obviously, Xiao Xuan was not the only one that bore a grudge. Although he hated that insect for bringing him there. At the same time, the insect had deep hatred towards Xiao Xuan for chopping off one of its antennae. Since its antenna hit the air and missed Xiao Xuan, that insect was quite annoyed. It gave a violent vibe and stood half up, with two pairs of legs to keep its balance, while the first two sickle-like forelimbs slashed toward Xiao Xuan, with a gust of icy wind on the blades. It jumped down at Xiao Xuan ruthlessly, as if it had already lost its mind. Xiao Xuan also jumped up high and stepped hard on top of the cave, which cracked the stone instantly. With the force of the recoil, Xiao Xuan twisted his body in the middle of the air. Instead of retreating, he went forward and rushed towards that insect with the sword in his hand. In here, the insect had a clear advantage of knowing the place better, so Xiao Xuan knew in his heart that he might not be able to outrun the insect. They were both vindictive, so of course revenge was a dish that would be better served when it's cold. Also, based on the insect's acting style, one had to fight a quick battle without stalling, if one intended to kill it. The boy and the insect were originally about 10 meters away, which was almost the same length as its antennae. However, with Xiao Xuan rushing towards the insect in full speed, the 10-meter distance was shortened to 0 in the blink of an eye. The forelimbs of the insect were still waving as it stood half up, which nearly blocked the narrow path. It created a whirlpool of blades, which hurt Xiao Xuan's face as he got near. He used his toothed sword to block one of the forelimbs, and the exploding force created by the collision nearly numbed Xiao Xuan's whole arm. However, he took no break and he promptly rolled and jumped over the whirlpool of blades, and suddenly arrived at the insect's side. Xiao Xuan stepped on the wall with his right foot, and with that strength, he struck down at the connecting part between its head and back like lightning. There was no protection of the back carapace, and no protection of the shield-like shell on the head. The insect finally realized that something was wrong, seeing that Xiao Xuan had the capability to leap over that whirlpool of blades. Its antenna was still back there, and those two forelimbs could not be turned around in a hurry. It withdrew its antenna to whip on Xiao Xuan's back, but it was still a little bit late. Although it was a sword without a pointed tip, it was as hard and tough as always. The toothed sword was crafted by Old K himself. Even if there were some minor gaps on its body, it was sharp enough to cut down the insect's neck. Puff. The toothed sword cut the insect's neck from top to bottom. In fact, the neck was the most vulnerable and soft part of that insect. Due to limited length, the toothed sword could only cut down half of its neck, but even so, it was painful enough for the insect to lose all its fighting capability. Even the antenna it withdrew turned soft and droopy. Xiao Xuan pulled back the knife and took the chance to strike again. This time, he almost chopped off its whole head. The waving forelimbs of the insect had no strength anymore, and the withdrawing antenna dropped to the ground, while its half-standing body finally went down. Xiao Xuan moved his numb arm as he tried to catch his breath. He went over and cut off the remaining antenna, as he decided to keep it for himself. After resting for a while, Xiao Xuan intended to leave. There was a dead insect, and perhaps it would attract other worms and insects to come to the spot. One needed to leave as soon as possible. Xiao Xuan stood in the middle of the tunnel, and now he had three options: continue to go along the path to the left, or the path in the right side, or just retreat to that three-forked crossing again. Should he go along the path or retreat to the three-forked crossing? Perhaps, if he went back and chose another path, he could have the right path, he could reunite with the hunting group. However, there was a chance that he might still choose the wrong way, where unknown dangers awaited him. There was no time to lose, and Xiao Xuan needed to make a quick decision. He closed his eyes to think, and then he turned to the left. This time he was not making the decision by the intuition of the flame, instead, he basically shielded the flaming horns totem in his mind. In the meantime, the egg-shaped light ball which covered the totem grew brighter, but the choice was still the one on the left. With the antenna in his hand, Xiao Xuan decided to move forward as he opened his eyes. Like and subscribe.